Doc, I want to thank you for taking the time today. Before we dive into the issue, I want to get a little bit of your history and your background and kind of what led you to Lexington Medical.
Well, my background is I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm a Midwesterner by nature. Went to medical school up in Canada. Came back to do my residency. I did in Pennsylvania, and I was in Pennsylvania in practice for 17 years before coming to Lexington Medical Center a year ago.
Absolutely. We saw you on the glass on the way in, calling in a report, doing the diagnosis side and all that part of it. But let me ask you this. You obviously spent the last 2 decades of your life on this particular cancer. Let me ask you this. 153,000 diagnoses annually.
Yeah.
That's fourth among the cancers, major cancers we know of. 53,000 deaths. That's the second highest. Obviously, this is a deadlier cancer. Why is that so? What's the medical basis there?
Most of the time, it's deadly because we don't catch it until it's late in its progression. The thing about colorectal cancers is they develop without any kind of symptoms. They can grow to be significant in size. They can spread to other areas before any symptoms are ever even noticed by an individual. So that's the biggest thing about this kind of cancer. And that is what leads to making colorectal cancer awareness programs so important, because we can really prevent a lot of deaths by diagnosing it early. And in many cases, we can also prevent the cancer by screening colonoscopies and getting rid of pathology that's in the colon before it ever has a chance to turn into a cancer.
So it's not something we see, it's not something we can necessarily feel, it's also not something, you said, that's symptomatic.
Correct. Yeah. A lot of times people can have cancers grow, they don't have pain, they don't bleed. You can actually bleed from a tumor in your colon, and the blood in your GI tracts gets digested. And when you pass stool out, there's no visible blood in it, but sometimes you can test with a reagent to find the occult blood that you can't see, but it would be microscopically visible with a reagent. And people become anemic. That's one of the signs of colorectal cancer, is somebody that becomes anemic without ever realizing that they're bleeding.
So that elevated mortality is tied to the lack of detection, lack of early detection?
Most of the time, yes.
Wow. Let's talk about this a little bit. We hear so much about many of the other cancers. There's so publicity on the media. There are huge fundraisers, the ribbons, different color ribbons. Obviously, there is a ribbon for colorectal cancer, a blue ribbon.
Yeah, we think it should be a brown ribbon.
Oh, I dig it. Maybe we get some more attention there. But let me ask you this, though. What is the stigma with this particular cancer? Obviously, it's one that's incredibly dangerous. It's one that people absolutely need to know about, get tested. But what's the stigma? What do you attribute that to?
Well, it's the colon. It's poop. Probably why we don't have a brown ribbon, because it's dirty and it's bodily function. It's not something that is readily discussed. I mean, you go into a private bathroom and you do your business. You do your business privately. Mm-hmm. People don't want to talk about it. So I mean, that's just
embarrassment.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, breaking that stigma, though, we've had a couple high-profile cases in recent years.
Sure.
Katie Couric's husband, Chadwick Boseman from the Black Panther franchise. Mm-hmm. Have these stories helped to raise the awareness, to raise the sense of urgency?
Well, I certainly think so. The question is the American society more aware of it? And, I would say yes. I mean, Katie Couric's husband, when she was on the Today Show, she was doing things. This is, kind of well before everything took off with social media and everything like that. So where people are now with where they get their news and what they're tuning into, I'm not really sure about that. I'm not into the marketing and media stuff. So, but we certainly advocate for screening for colorectal cancer across the country. We have a month dedicated to colorectal cancer awareness. it's made an impact on the death rate associated with colorectal cancer. The last that I had heard from our society is it's now the third leading cause of cancer-related death, when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was the second leading cause of cancer-related death. So we're having an impact.
A gradual decrease too over time. You talk about attributing that to the early testing. I wanted to ask you about that, about the screening process. We've all heard the joke, I'm looking forward to that like a colonoscopy. But it's not that bad, is it? So walk us through the process. How does it?
The worst part of colonoscopy is doing a prep the day beforehand that flushes everything out of your system. And in order to get a good look inside the colon with colonoscopy, you have to wash the stool away. So you do an oral preparation that flushes everything out of your system. That's the worst part. After that, then you come in. I mean, you have to get stuck with a needle for an IV, and you're put off to sleep in a nice, comfortable state. You have a good sleep while this procedure is done. You wake up, you're able to go home and eat what you want to.
Nice.
That's the procedure itself is not as bad as people are thinking that it's going to be. Of course, people don't want to be awake for it, and which is understandable. If you were awake for it, that would be bad.
Now, the age range, typically 45 is what we're hearing. But
age 45 is what we're doing for average risk screening, meaning that people don't have a family history of colorectal cancer. They're not having symptoms. They don't have a history of polyps themselves.
Well, walk us through the risk factors. You mentioned just a minute ago genetics. That's a huge part of it, right?
Yes. So 30% of colorectal cancers have some sort of genetic predisposition. Only about 5% of them do we actually know the genetic defect that we can test for. And that's based on significant family history, at least 3 family members over 2 generations, typically one younger than the age of 50, is hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer, and familial adenomatous polyposis, where the colon is literally carpeted with polyps, which is a dominant genetic trait for the patients that oftentimes they're needing surgical intervention early on, and they have a very high potential for cancer development with that condition.
But there are other factors.
There are other, certainly, all the factors that lead towards colorectal cancer are your genetics, what you were born with, and then the environmental factors that you live with, the foods that you eat, mostly the foods that you eat, but smoking, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, those types of environmental factors are also a contributor to colorectal cancer, your susceptibility to colorectal cancer.
So 45, but a lot of folks now are doing this earlier because of a rise in colorectal cancer rates among younger
Well, some
Americans.
people may be getting their colonoscopies early, but the ones that are typically getting colonoscopy early are people that are actually having some type of symptom. Either they're having bleeding or they're having abdominal pain, some change in their bowel habits. For routine colorectal cancer screening, that means that patients are having no symptoms whatsoever. So yes, we do find colorectal cancers in younger patients, yes, and they get their colonoscopies because we're investigating certain symptoms that they've expressed.
So after the age of 45, let's say you go in that first screening, how often is this something we do every year? Is it something every...
The thing about colonoscopy is if you have a normal colonoscopy, you have no other family history, no other risk factors, every 10 years is what's recommended for routine colorectal cancer screening. So it's an every 10-year thing. If you have polyps, the precursors to cancer, typically 5 years, maybe 3 years if you have multiple polyps at the time of your colonoscopy, but it's not an annual thing now.
Well, and tell us a little bit about Lexington Medical and its offerings here for folks who are, God forbid, let's say they get a bad report, they get a diagnosis. Walk us through some of the steps and the services you guys offer.
Sure. I mean, again, if you find colorectal cancer early, it's very curable. We have a very high success rate at curing colorectal cancer if you can find it in its early stages. It does typically entail an operation to remove the section of colon that the cancer is in. So we first get the diagnosis of colon cancer, location of where it is, do a metastatic workup looking to see if it's spread anywhere else. And if it hasn't spread anywhere else, we typically move into the treatment stage, which would be for colon cancer. We go into a surgical treatment and get the segment of the colon out. Rectal cancer is a little different. Sometimes we do treatment up front before the surgery. And typically we still move forward with a surgical intervention to get out the segment of the colon rectum that is that has the disease, as well as the lymph nodes that drain it. You can get put back together so that the GI tract remains in continuity, and you don't typically need to have a colostomy with elective colorectal surgery. Rectal cancers sometimes do need a temporary colostomy. Sometimes, if they're very, very low distal in the GI tract, right close to the anus, if the anus is sacrificed, you would need to have a permanent colostomy.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only case of needing to have a permanent colostomy, really.
And obviously the key to avoiding those outcomes is getting that screening.
Early detection.
Earlier the better, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm checking my chart. I'm probably due with you guys. So, hey, maybe we'll come in and we'll do one Katie Couric style. But
you bet.
Doc, I appreciate you taking the time on this. And you, again, spent so much of your career on this and focused on this. And I tell you what, in addition to all these other awareness efforts, we're going to work with you on that ribbon. Let's see if we can at least get us maybe a striped ribbon or something. We'll take a look. Doc, thank you for your time on this. We appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.